Hello, I'm just going to give it a few minutes until I see some people starting to join me. Hi Sophie. Hi, that's M. Hi M. Thank you for the wave. Giving it a few moments for the Psychologies Magazine readers, subscribers and friends to catch up with me. It's my regular Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. UK time, regular weekly wisdom with Mary Fenwick. I write the Agony column for Psychologies Magazine, and that's once a month in the magazine. And each week I'm here for half an hour to answer your questions and also to have a bit of a kind of exchange of stories and experience with the lovely community that follows Psychologies Magazine. So as you join, say hello and let me know where you're joining from. And if you're just joining now, hi Alan. I'm Alison, Julie, Clary. Let me know where you're joining from, and particularly if you have any questions or comments or experiences that you want to share, drop them in the comments and I'll read them out to everybody else. So my name is Mary Fenwick. I have the honour and privilege of writing the Agony column for Psychologies Magazine. So that's once a month I get to answer or consider, give feedback on 3 letters from readers of Psychologies Magazine. And then each week I'm here for half an hour on a Tuesday at 5:30 UK time to answer any questions that you have live, and to facilitate us to get to know each other better, share stories and experiences. Psychologies Magazine, if you're not familiar with it, is the UK's best-selling mindful living magazine, and we also focus quite a lot on emotional well-being in general. So some of the overriding characteristics of the magazine, and my experience of working for the magazine, writing for the magazine and being a fan of the magazine, some of the overriding characteristics are that we are interested in what the latest research says. We're interested in building a sense of resourcefulness in the people who are part of our community, and perhaps most of all, we've got an ethos of being kind. Hi Tobeka from South Africa. Thank you for saying hello. Hi Lynn. Hi Lynn. So this week's theme that I want to talk about is reinvention. I'm thinking about this for a number of reasons. September in the UK, August, sort of end of summer, going into autumn, and funnily enough, even though autumn in the kind of season of the year is about maybe closing down, harvest, going into hibernation, metaphorically, I find this time of year in the UK, in the Northern Hemisphere, is also quite a bit about rebirth. Maybe because it's associated with the start of the academic year and the school year. I find that this is the time of year where a lot of people are thinking about what's going to be different at work in particular. And I've been asked to run a workshop about reinventing your creative career in midlife. That's Alison says, Alison from the UK, love reading your page in the mag. Oh, thank you, Alison. Honestly, it's just such a pleasure to connect with people on here. I genuinely find this community to be so open and generous and kind. And it's all credit to Susie Walker, who sets the tone, the editor-in-chief. But I can see Curious Creative, that's another Julie, I think, also joining. So this week's theme is reinvention. Particularly, I'm interested in your tips about reinvention. If this is, let's say, not your first rodeo, If you have been doing something for a while and then you've changed to do something else, I would be really interested to know what are your top tips for reinvention in a work sense. What has worked for you when it comes to reinvention, and what do you kind of wish that you might have known sooner in your journey towards reinventing yourself at work somehow? I think this year will have, well, it has. It's forced a form of reinvention on all of us. And as I speak to you at 5:30 on the Tuesday evening, Tuesday the 22nd of September, we are expecting an announcement in the UK later this evening, UK time, about changes in our kind of lockdown requirements. So we are going to be, it looks as if in many ways we're going back into lockdown, we're just not using those words. And the message that we were having about physically going back into office spaces looks likely to change. So my theme tonight is reinvention, particularly at work. I know a lot of people who've reinvented themselves at work, and I wonder if you would agree with me, for instance, that reinventing yourself at work is something that tends to come to women in particular, because we often reinvent ourselves at work if we have children, or if we have another major life change, like as long as there's income inequality, it's more likely statistically that women are going to follow men around. So you might end up reinventing yourself because you've had to change location due to your partner's work. I know it's not always the case, but it does seem to me that reinvention is something that women are practicing more often in the workplace. Sometimes we are reinventing out of choice, like out of a positive choice to go towards something that's more exciting or feels more aligned with who we are. And sometimes we're reinventing because we've been kind of forced into it. There's a metaphor in change coaching that we call it sometimes the burning platform. You've got no choice but to leave and do something different. I'm going to talk a bit about reinvention, but I would love to know what your tips are. Oh, Julie says, I think I didn't reinvent myself. I think that was the problem. I followed the corporate structure and wish I hadn't. Now that is very intriguing. I want to know more about that. I'd be really interested to know more about that. And I'm guessing that ultimately meant that you reached a point where you left the corporate structure. Is that right? Because she's saying, I think I didn't reinvent myself. I think that was the problem. I followed the corporate structure and wish I hadn't. Interesting. What might have helped you to have the courage to reinvent yourself? Did it almost have to get worse before you might have reinvented yourself? I mean, this is the horrible irony, is that sometimes there's also some saying about we change when the pain of change is less than the pain of staying the same. So as long as we can tolerate staying the same, we tend to stick there. But at a certain point, sometimes it becomes too painful. Yeah, Julie saying, yeah, that's right. I towed the line and it just wasn't me. I've learned so much about myself since I left. Yeah, it just wasn't me. As I said, I am thinking about reinvention, partly because at this time of year I tend to think about it. I know there's a lot of chat, for example, about empty nest at the moment. A lot of women round about my age, and also men, a lot of parents, let's say, are noticing the big shift when their children leave to go to university at this time of year, and they're noticing that the life that they've had for 18 years or whatever is no longer the same. So that opens up the field for some reinvention for parents at this time of year. And for example, I know that there's a person I follow on Instagram, Sarah Heron, Heron, who is running a program for women who want to rethink their kind of personal image and clothing style as empty nesters after years of putting other people first. So I suggest that you have a look for Sarah Heron's program if that applies to you. But I'm also thinking about reinvention because I will be running a workshop on reinvention for the Society of Authors in November. They've asked me to do it because they have got a number of people. The Society of Authors, I didn't know this, has got 11,000 members, professional writers, illustrators, people involved in the production of the written and printed word. And I guess it must be online word, in words, stories, illustrations. And the Society of Authors have asked me to do one specifically for people who are more in kind of midlife or mid-career, because there's a lot available for people who are maybe just starting out as creatives. That's an exciting thing. Other people want to invest in you at that point. But when you're a mid-career creative, there are sometimes not as many resources made available to you to think about what direction your career might take. And I'm delighted to have been asked to do this workshop, and in part it's come about because of the Psychologies Magazine connection, and also Anna Ganley, who asked me to do it, had seen my TEDx where I talk about one of my major reinventions. Well, just many times I've transformed, and one of the major times was in 2008 when my husband died. It was the start of a global recession, and the magazine that I was editing at that point collapsed, and I got the news on the day of my husband's funeral. And that's a story that I almost tell so often that it sometimes, I don't know, I sometimes feel like I'm telling a story when I say that, as in it's not wholly true, but sadly it is wholly true. So I don't know if anybody can wholly be an expert on reinvention, because by definition it's going to be different for all of us. But let's just say I have definitely done it more than once. I've supported other people to reinvent themselves, and I know quite a bit about the theory of reinvention. One of the people who I particularly admire and would tend to follow when it comes to talking about reinventing your career or transitioning is Herminia Ibarra, who wrote a book called Working Identity, and that's about career transitions, again for people who are already embarked on their career, because you can get some help at an earlier stage if you're thinking about what you want to do with your life. But okay. Alison says, I often get so many different ideas for reinventions that I never know which one to pick, so I end up just saying the same. Now, I'm interested in that, Alison, because having those loads of different ideas is part of the kind of recognised pathway. I'm just seeing Nikki joining. Nikki, who's one of my colleagues from Psychologies Magazine. Hi, Nikki. This week I am talking about reinvention, and partly that's because I'm going to be running a workshop in November for the Society of Authors. Hi, Nikki, waving. And that's about reinvention, creative reinvention in mid-career. And that is focusing my mind to a certain extent on the stuff that I've already practiced, that I've supported people to do, and that I know in theory about reinvention. Hi, Ruby. Lovely to see you. Hello and a flower. And One of the researchers and academics who I recommend in the field of reinvention is Herminia Ibarra, and I've printed out an article of hers which is called Reinventing Your Career in the Time of Coronavirus, and this is from the Harvard Business Review in April this year, and this will be one of the resources that I use and recommend in my workshop in November. But there'll be a few, and I'll also be talking about my own experience of reinvention. So anybody who has something to add to our communal story about reinvention, what have you done? In what way have you reinvented? In what way might you reinvent yourself? What has helped you with reinvention? What do you wish you knew earlier about reinvention? Pausing for people to catch up with me a bit. If you are just joining, I am Mary Fenwick. I write the Agony art column for Psychologies Magazine once a month, and once a week I'm here for half an hour on a Tuesday, weekly wisdom, 5:30 UK time, available to answer your questions, but also just to kind of share stories and experiences and to facilitate the Psychologies community, those of us in it, to share our own stories and experiences, because those times that we feel the most alone are very human, and we are never as alone as we think we are in those moments. So when it comes to reinvention, I've got a few things that I'd like to say in general, and I'd love to know which, if any of them, resonate for you. Nikki is saying, reinventing myself after my girls had started school and getting back into the corporate world. I'd be interested to know how that went, Nikki, and now I know you in kind of another incarnation, I guess. And Lisa is saying, I worked in the corporate sector for 13 years and then realigned myself with a new career in wellbeing. I think in that sense, Lisa, you are living what is many people's dream, because I listen to, work with a lot of people who think about that kind of transition. What prompted your reinvention, I'd be interested to know, and what helped, and what do you wish you had known earlier about your reinvention? The thing that I want, or some of the things that I want to say about reinvention in general, in theory, are that we all do have many possible selves, and so a reinvention is not so much it's usually not so much inventing something from scratch. It's more as Nikki says, that it's not as scary as the stories we tell ourselves. I'd agree, and I think I'm just about to say something really similar. It's not so much a case of throwing everything out, of saying I've been wrong about everything up until this point. It's more like looking in your wardrobe and thinking, oh, I'd forgotten I had that coat. How about I try that on again? Oh, that actually really goes with something that I bought more recently. So it's more a case of assembling or trying on one of our other alternative selves. And I find that a less scary way of thinking about reinvention, is that it's an opportunity to be a bit more playful with our other possible selves. One element about reinvention is that playfulness is very helpful. And I would say that the last 6 months, although many people have successfully experimented, for some people it's been difficult because Alison says, I love that idea. Oh, thank you. Good, I'm glad that helps. In some ways, the last few months will have made reinvention more difficult if the last few months have made you feel more frightened that tends to close down our thinking. And people who are frightened are more conservative in their thinking, less creative, unfortunately. So if you are getting the sense that the world is calling you towards reinvention, it's a really helpful thing to do what you need to do to get yourself into a more positive and relaxed frame of mind, because then you'll find that your brain just kind of opens up and you see more possibilities and things, feel less scary. So Tobecker says, hone the talents you have whilst working. That is another of my tips. That's amazing. Fantastic. Thank you. So my first kind of perspective on reinvention is that it's not so much throwing everything out, it is being playful with other possible selves. Then there's an idea which is to do with embracing the mess. Things get messy. My son says whenever he tries to tidy up, it always gets worse before it gets better. And as part of a process of reinvention, we have to expect that. We won't necessarily have a neat and tidy story that we can tell other people. Actually, funnily enough, I've just received an email from somebody who I know, Jana Nightingale, who I knew when she was running now live events for Psychologies Magazine. And Jana has written this really lovely email, sort of, in a way, reintroducing herself, because some of us haven't heard much from Jana for 2 years. I've been in touch with her on Instagram, but I knew that her father died suddenly, relatively young, unexpectedly, and they only had, I think, 3 weeks' notice. And it's really, the whole grief process has thrown a lot of Jana's ideas up in the air, coupled with the fact that she had a 1-year-old at the time that her dad died. And there's a sense in which Jana maybe went quiet for a period of time, because when we're in that, I love this word, I'm trying out this word, that liminal space, Liminal, that in-between space, it might not be the time that we're for us to talk that much to other people. Although talking to other people is important, and it comes in at a different stage of the process, there's a certain part of the reinvention process which is just messy and really difficult to talk about, and all you can do is accept the mess, accept the uncertainty. And if anything, there's a period of time during your reinvention where you want to avoid closing down your options prematurely. So it's like being brave enough to just be in that undefined space. It's not one thing or the other. I've been reading a series of detective novels over lockdown and over this period of time, a series of detective novels by Ellie Griffiths. Any other Ellie Griffiths fans on here? She has a detective, and her called Ruth Galloway, and Ruth is a forensic archaeologist, and she's a fantastic character. She works in Norfolk. This is all fictional detective stories by Ellie Griffiths, but she talks a lot about the liminal space in Norfolk of between the earth and the sea, that area that is marshland, and it's sometimes solid ground and it's sometimes underwater, and that's this liminal space. And we can have that feeling when we're reinventing that we're sometimes on solid ground and sometimes underwater, and that is to be expected in any process of reinvention. But retreating to higher ground, to solid ground, might mean that we miss some of the opportunities in that fertile and rich liminal space. So those are my first two thoughts about reinvention. Number one is to do with allowing a number of different possible selves and feeling playful with them, to allow that liminal space to just be. And the next kind of thread that I know has worked in theory and in practice is to get going on different projects. So somebody earlier said to start doing things while you're still at work. And that kind of project-based approach is really helpful because it introduces you to new and different ways of working with new and different people. And if you can do a little bit of that experimenting with projects, learning and doing while you're still in your previous job or even in your liminal space, those type of experiments can be really helpful as well. But it is important to do something, to not just talk about it. Now, somebody earlier was saying that there are so many possible reinventions that she never quite commits to one. And if you're interested in moving out of that space, and you don't have to be, but if you are, what I'd be working with, say, a coaching client who was saying that to me, how I'd be working with them would be to devise little experiments, things that they can actually do rather than just talking about it or thinking about it, because we can think that prolonged introspection, a bit more thinking, is going to bring us some insight. But that doesn't necessarily happen because we can easily think ourselves out of the change. And what works more for adults, and this is a Herminia Ibarra phrase, she says, adults don't tend to think their way into a new way of acting. We more often act our way into a new way of thinking. And one of the things that happens is you might be considering a reinvention because you feel as if you're not being authentic where you are. And you want to become more authentic somehow in what you're expressing at work. A trap along the way can be that as you try out these new ways of being, they don't feel authentic to begin with. In a way, because they're not currently authentic, and they're new and they're unfamiliar. So you kind of have to just go with it. Don't think about it too much. Invent a project, an experiment, a pilot scheme. I love the word pilot. I can always get going with a pilot. Sorry. Yeah. Love a pilot scheme. Don't think too much. Find something that you can get going with as a project or experiment. That's if you want to move into the kind of execution phase. But you can expect that it will feel uncomfortable. It might even feel inauthentic for a period of time until you get used to the new acts. The new way of acting will eventually lead you to a new way of thinking. And another element of the reinvention process that I want to talk about is here we go. I've just noticed that my comments got a bit stuck. I'm going to come back to my point, which is going to be about networking. You can remind me if I forget. I think we're continually reinventing ourselves. This is Vladdy, Florence. Change is a constant, yeah. There are bigger changes, and for those, certainly nature and animals help always. Yeah, reconnecting with nature and animals, with those natural processes can help to ground us and give us confidence that even if everything seems to be decaying and falling apart, it's part of a natural cycle, and rebirth will come. Let's see what else we have. just catching up with comments. I think I've got Kerry Zedo77 is laughing, and I suspect that might be me getting distracted about the thought of a pilot and how much I might love a pilot. So my final point, I think, no, it's not my final, I've got two more points, is to do with networking. I am probably going to do a whole one of these about networking because networking is a concept that again, in my experience, and also the theory would back this up, women are very good at networking, very good at creating new social connections, but not necessarily as good at making the most of those connections when it comes to work and reinvention. And the Herminia Ibarra writes a lot about networking, and in this HBR article, she's talking about we can get into a dilemma with our networks because the people that we're closest to, the members of our strongest network who care about us the most, they will tend to be so close to us that they're seeing only the same stuff as we are. They're not bringing that many new ideas into our circle and our awareness. So that's the kind of issue with people that we're really close to in our network. Then, if you think about the people who are weak social ties, your more distant connections, they might have new information, but they're not as motivated to help you. And the way out of that kind of dilemma between how do you get value or build a stronger, broader network, the way around that dilemma of your strong social ties or your weak social ties is to think about your dormant social ties. That's the people who you have been close to in the past, but you might have slightly lost touch with. And reactivating those dormant social ties is a particularly useful thing to do when you think about reinvention. Two other little points about reinvention. I do absolutely recommend that you talk about it to other people. That will bust you out of the introspective loop. You'll find yourself telling a story. So try out different stories, talk it out and try out different stories. And that takes us back into this idea that you're being playful with your possible selves. When you tell a story, you might find unexpected clarity. You might end up saying something that you didn't even know you were thinking. But you'll also possibly accidentally commit yourself to taking an action. And hold yourself accountable once you've said it out loud. So those are my thoughts about reinvention. I'm Mary Fenwick. As I introduced myself at the start, I write the Agony art column for Psychologies Magazine once a month. And once a week I'm here for weekly wisdom. And I'm available for half an hour from about 5:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, weekly wisdom with me, Mary Fenwick. Here to answer your questions, share stories, tips, experiences, and today I've been talking about reinvention. What helps when we need or want to reinvent ourselves? I've talked about the idea of having many different possible selves, not having this big dramatic idea. The Mighty Jazz says, thank you, that was great to help me move from inaction to action in my job hunt. Oh, fantastic. That's brilliant. I hope you'll come back and let us know how you get on with that. And Nikki has posted my Instagram handle. If anybody would like to follow me as well, I'm at Mary the Fenwick on Instagram. You're very welcome, Nikki. Talking about many possible selves. It's not throwing out your whole wardrobe. It's finding the pieces that you loved once upon a time and trying them on, or things that you still fit and you can try them in different combinations. So playing with many possible selves, embracing that messy period, expecting and anticipating that it will be messy and liminal for a while. Taking a project-based approach, So finding little pilot schemes that you can try out, but taking some form of action that gets you connected with new and different people. Thinking about your network, thinking about people who you've been connected with in the past, but those ties have gone a bit dormant. Reactivating those dormant ties, that's particularly useful when it comes to reinvention. And don't get stuck for too long in being introspective, and just give it a go, talk about it, share stories and experiences, and when you see this posted on Instagram, drop your stories down below. I will be back next week. If you're interested in getting a copy of Psychologies Magazine delivered to your door, have a look for the link in the bio. Thank you for joining. Goodbye for now.